This video will demonstrate how to create a blueprint for your first decision path. Step 1. Identify or create a task in your area of expertise or training. A task can take the form of a problem to be solved, a painting to be critiqued, or a poem to be analyzed. It can be anything you want your students to break down and determine an appropriate course of action. We will use a basic statistics course as an example throughout this video. But note, decision models can be created for any discipline. Here is an example of a statistics word problem. Now it's your turn. Pause the video and locate or create a specific problem, task, scenario, or object in a course or training of your choice. Step 2. Determine what you would have your students do after analyzing this problem. Here are some examples of purposes of decision models. In chemistry, students will balance chemical equations. In math, students will solve algebraic word problems. In information literacy, students will evaluate the credibility of claims from tertiary sources. In art, students will determine the artistic movements that influence specific works of art. Pause the video and determine what you would have your students do after analyzing this problem. Here are the examples again. Step 3. Make a list of questions that you would ask yourself when analyzing this problem. Here are questions that may come to mind as we analyze our example statistics problem. Let's read a few of them. Is the distribution for each sample normally distributed or not? How many independent variables are there? Is this question descriptive or inferential? Depending on the scenario, this list could also include actions that you could take as you analyze the problem. In this example, one of the actions would be to perform a calculation. Here is a caution. Do not use the wording in the specific problem as you create your questions. For example, customer satisfaction is what we call the dependent variable in this problem. Let's imagine that we change one of the other questions to this. What type of data is customer satisfaction? The difficulty with doing it this way is that eventually we will be asking these same questions about other problems like the height of a tennis ball bounce or the thickness of the cream in a cookie. But the thickness of the cream in a cookie has nothing to do with customer satisfaction. Neither does the height of a tennis ball bounce. Therefore, we will make this question more generic like this. What type of data is this? Pause the video. Look at your scenario or task. List all the questions you ask yourself or actions you take when analyzing or evaluating the scenario or task yourself. Make sure the questions are generic and not specific to each problem. Step 4. Put your final question or action at the bottom of your list. Here's an example of a final question. Which statistical method would be appropriate to use with this research question? The idea is that all of the answers to the previous questions will inform the culminating answer to your final question. Note, your final question can also be written as a final action. For example, select the appropriate statistical method based on the wording of the research question. Pause the video and write your final question or action at the bottom of your list. Here are some examples to look at. Step 5. If necessary, delete, modify, or add additional questions. An instructor may want to modify this question or this question. They may want to delete this question or add this question. Pause the video and if necessary, delete, modify, or add additional questions. Step 6. Decide the order or the questions and/or actions. For some of the questions, it doesn't matter what order you place them in. In this statistics example, you could determine what the independent variable is before the dependent variable, or vice versa. In other cases, the order is necessary. For our statistics example, it is best to determine first if the question is descriptive or inferential before analyzing further. So we place this question at the top of the list. It may be helpful to number your questions and/or actions. Pause the video and order your questions and/or actions. Step 7. Create options for your students to choose from for each question on your list. In our statistics example, the first question asks whether the poem is descriptive or inferential. So the options the students have to choose from would simply be descriptive and inferential. The same goes with this next question. Since the three options are listed in the question itself, we will place them below as options. However, the next question will be different. The options are not listed in this question. There are three types of data we want our students to consider: scaled, ordinal, and nominal data. So these will be our options. Here is an example of what a list of questions with their options might look like. Notice most of your questions will have options like these. However, in some instances, there can be an infinite number of options for certain questions. For example, the question below asks, what is the dependent variable? There are an infinite number of options for this question. Here are just a few of the unlimited number of dependent variables there are in the world that could show up in hundreds of problems the students could see. Obviously, you will not be able to list an infinite number of options here. For now, just put the letters A, B, C to signify that there are too many possibilities to list. This will also be the case if you want the students to solve for a problem and treat it like a multiple choice question. Let's revisit the earlier caution we shared about questions. Do not, again, use the wording in the specific problem you chose as options for a question. For example, if we ask the question, who commissioned this study, and we pulled out options from the wording of this specific problem, then when we present the students with another research study commissioned by a different group, such as study of fruit flies, these options will not be relevant. In other words, we need to have generic options that would be relevant to hundreds of different problems. In summary, most of your options will be categories like these. And a few may provide ABC options, like this one. But none of the options will use the actual wording from a problem or scenario. Pause the video and place options under each question and/or action on your list. Put ABC options only for actions or questions that have unlimited possible answers. Step 8, highlight the correct options that should be chosen at each decision point for the problem, scenario, or object you originally selected. Here is the original problem for our example. We will now highlight the options that are relevant to this problem. This is done based on conditions identified in the problem. For this first question, we will highlight the conditions met in the problem that let us know that this is an inferential problem. We will do the same for the next question, and the next question, and so on and so forth. Note sometimes the conditions are clearly stated or observed in the scenario, and other times they are implied. You may ask, how do I choose a correct option if I have questions with ABC options? We recommend first locating the answer to the question in the problem and putting this correct answer in parentheses next to the question. Pause the video and highlight the correct options that should be chosen at each decision point for the problem, scenario, or object you originally selected. You are now ready to enter the DBL software and create your first decision path.